Hi everybody, this is Ellie. Thanks so much for joining me today for a video where I share my tips on learning to hand letter. I will say right at the beginning that I am in no way an expert. I've had this requested a couple of times and I figured I would share with you my progress over the years and what I would recommend to someone who is just starting out. I have always loved hand lettering or playing with writing styles. I used to doodle all the time back in elementary school and high school, and finding the planner community just took that up to the next level. Something that you may already know about me is that I have what I call a non-traditional pen grip. The actual style, I believe, is called a lateral quadrupod. So this is a pretty tight grip. It does give me a lot of control. Yes, my hand can hurt after longer stints of writing, and I'm also heavy-handed, and sometimes I'm gripping it really hard without realizing. I can hold my pen in a traditional grip. I just choose not to. I don't like it. I don't like my writing like that. This is how I've grown up writing, and it works for me. That said, when I try to film myself writing, the top-down view is literally just my fist around this pen, which isn't going to be super helpful for this video. So I'm not actually sure how this video will come together once it's edited, but I imagine I will be inserting some photos or clips throughout and maybe having voiceover with that. This is my first time doing a video like this, so hopefully you bear with me. So first, I guess it would be helpful to have an idea of what hand lettering is. And my favorite definition is one that I found on the Stadler website. It says, hand lettering is the creation of artistic lettering. And I think that's perfect. It's playing around with your writing, and there are so many different styles and ways that can look. For the purposes of this video, and basically for the styles that I do the most often, this is kind of the focus, a mix between printing and handwriting, and using both monoline and brush lettering. So the difference there is that with monoline lettering, the width of the line or the pen that you're using stays the same throughout. And with brush lettering, you can vary the line widths depending on how hard you press down. I'll talk about that a little more as I go. If you're wanting to practice your hand lettering, you will need some tools to do so. The thing is, the types of pens or brush markers that you will like will highly depend on your preference, how large you want your lettering to be, probably what feels the most comfortable in your hand, what's available to you. All of those things will factor in. My suggestion would be to start with what you have. If you're someone who's in the community, it's likely that you've already picked up a few pens and brush pens here and there. And if you haven't, any pen will do to start with the shaping of the letters. And if you are interested in trying any sort of specific brush pens or markers, I would recommend buying just one or two to start with, because you don't want to buy a whole set of pastel Tombows and think they'll be perfect for your lettering before realizing that A, the brushes are too big, and B, the colors aren't your style. Can you tell that's what I did? And the only thing that I would suggest being a little more specific with is the paper you use. So brush pens will always fray after use, but the smoother your paper is, the longer they'll last. So for me, I first did my practicing on printer paper, and it's what I had. It's fine, but that pastel set of Tombows did fray pretty quickly. The pads that I have used for years and loved are these ones here. This is a Rhodia dot pad. It's a spiral. I like the spiral at the top like that, and I would also recommend getting a dot or a square grid. It just helps when you're learning how to size and space out your letters. The guidelines are right there for you. So I'll show you some of my old pages, which have definitely informed kind of the steps or stages that I would suggest you practice your writing in. So the first thing I would recommend is just to start with your regular printing. Just get a feel for your writing and the shapes of your letters, because that will be the basis that all of your hand lettering styles come from. So that's what I have here. The next step I would suggest is becoming more intentional when you are shaping your letters. So instead of just quickly writing it, thinking about what you might want them to look like and including that. I will go into this in more detail. This is just an overview to get started. The next thing I suggest is to use a Crayola Supertip, and I will show you in a few minutes, but it's because it has a bullet tip and not a brush tip. Well, you know what? Let me show you that part right now. So hopefully that's focusing. So that's the bullet tip as compared to, say, a Tombow dual brush pen. So the Crayola is going to be much firmer, whereas this has a ton of flex, which is what it's designed for. However, with the Crayola, you can still vary the line width, not as much and as dramatically, but enough to get the idea of the hand motions that you'll need without worrying about the brush pen just doing its own thing. So after you've practiced with that, then I suggest you move on to whatever brush pens you would like. For me, I have practiced with two Tombows here, the Tombow Fudenosuke in the hard tip, which if I could only have one brush pen, it would be this one. And this is the Tombow dual brush pen. So let's see what some of my practicing through the years has looked like. So like I said, I have used multiples of these, and I bought this just to start with hand lettering. It has evolved into a scratch pad, both of them are, but it's just great to pull out whenever I need it. I'm not sure if they do, but Tombow used to have free worksheets to print from their website. And that's the very first thing that I practiced on. That was the printer paper that frayed my Tombows. And it did have some shape tracing to do, so I think I incorporated some of that in here. We can see I helpfully wrote the date, so this is January 2019. And hopefully you can see that there has been some progress. Actually, let me say that right now. If there is nothing else that you take from this video, I hope you'll remember that hand lettering really does improve with practice, as do most things. But even if it feels frustrating, the more you do it, the more comfortable and repetitive the motion is in your hand, the more that you'll like the results. So keep that in mind. So we can see I've just been playing around there. Here as well, I seem to really enjoy that word. Look at how straight those letters are. That's clearly what I was focusing on. This is some monoline lettering. So one of the things that I will always do is have a pad of paper in front of me if I'm on a phone call. And I tend to just write down whatever words jump out at me. So, my friend and I were reading a Brene Brown book together. If you see these words like shame and window of tolerance, that is why. Oh, here is another phone call. So this is a lot of the kind of fonts that I like to use here and there. I don't use them very much, but they're fun to play around with. I don't have any tips for these ones though. I really just search hand lettering or fonts on Pinterest usually, and then I will save it and try to copy it and eventually make it my own. Here I'm trying to play with a Tombow. I have a hard time with how large it is and how once it gets frayed, it makes these little straggly bits. Oh, here, hello, lettering. I had a really hard time with the Tombow Fudenosuke soft tip as well. Here, I'm just practicing the letters themselves. So some letters, I am happy how it turns out almost every time. Other letters always give me trouble, like S. S is still very frustrating to me with some brush pens. I've moved on to using the Crayola Supertips there. See, just practicing. I just have pens around all the time. And this helps. I remember this is the first time that I really felt like I had made noticeable progress. And one of the things that I find that really helps is keeping a pad, like I said, at hand. And I especially like to keep it in front of the TV. So if I'm watching a baseball game, for example, I will just sometimes sit there with a brush pen and write down words that I hear. It's usually names, but not always, and it's fun. This was when I had inked up some fountain pens, again, just practicing with my letters, handwriting. When you see pages like this is when I am sitting in front of the TV. So I'm just going ahead. I can see these are player names, and this is from, I'm gonna guess 2020 maybe? Practicing the alphabet again, still in front of the TV. I was watching YouTube here. It was a trial on YouTube, and I just had my pen in front of it. This wasn't all in one day, obviously, but you can see it's just practice. It's just repetition. At my brother's baseball game, oh, things I've heard at a baseball game, that's fun. That's just things that I hear players yelling to each other. And this here is, oh, it's a phone call with a friend. I have the Papermate Flairs, I think, were these colors, and I just have fun with it. Again, just words that come up. My hand likes to be busy so that my brain is a little quieter. And finding ways to practice that feel kind of organic and not like a chore is something that I would also highly recommend. Okay, so now when it comes to practicing, like I mentioned, the first thing I suggest is to just take your regular pen, whatever you're using right now for your planning would be fine, and just write out the alphabet. One of the best things about hand lettering is that everybody's style is unique because everybody's printing or basis is different. So you get to build off of that. And if there are certain things you don't like about it, it's something that you can always tweak and adjust along the way. So here I am using a Pilot Acroball pen. This is a ballpoint pen that I have been using in my planner for months, and I've just gone ahead and written out the alphabet. The other thing that I always like to do when it comes to writing is to write the sentence that uses all of the letters in the English alphabet. So the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. So doing this, again, just gives you a starting off point. It lets you see how your letters form naturally, and we build from there. So I've already mentioned the types of hand lettering styles that I'm playing around with here are monoline and brush lettering. So again, monoline just means that the width of the lines stay the same throughout the entire word or whatever you're writing. Just doing this here with a Le Pen technical drawing pen. This is a 0.1 and these are my favorite fine liners. In contrast, the brush lettering style means that the line widths will vary depending on how hard you are putting pressure on the brush tip. This is the Tombow Fudenosuke in the hard tip. And I am showing you guys in real time right now. This is not perfect. I have scraggly lines. You can see I have to go over different sections. It is what it is. Sometimes the pen feels better in my hand, sometimes it doesn't, and we continue on. So although these look very different, the way that I'm shaping the letters is the same. So when I'm just writing regularly, I'm not concerned about when or where I need to lift my hand off the page or anything like that. It's completely natural. When it comes to brush lettering specifically, typically the line is thicker on the downstroke. So down, and then when I'm coming up, it's lighter again, so less pressure, and then down. The way that I have found it best to control this is to basically lift my brush between every stroke. So we've got the R comes over, and then I might lift it, adjust. Sometimes I'm doing a lot of rotating without realizing it. I don't know why. I think just to make sure that I'm on a fresher part of the brush tip. I have no idea. Just to adjust it in my hand. So I'll do a U, see, lift. It's just natural at this point. Oh. And I do the same thing when I'm doing my monoline lettering. And part of the reason is because even though I don't technically have to vary the line, if I'm going over, for example, something, like if I'm going over this M part like I would do in printing, it can make it thicker and just not look as clean. So it's another one of those things. See, I'll lift it. Editing Ellie here. I just wanted to add that when it comes to monoline writing especially, but also with brush lettering, when I mention kind of going over, for example, this first line in the M, when I'm doing regular printing, one of the ways to move around that and also make your letters more interesting is to create space there. So instead of instead of this, you'll notice most of my M's are like, well, not like that. Well, maybe like that. It could go either way, but that happens with most letters when I'm doing monoline writing. So like B, C, instead of going over and up again over the B here, I just created that space. And then I do that as well with brush lettering, just because the downstroke is so thick that I don't usually want to come up. You can, you just vary your width, but a lot of times it just has a little bit more space. So not quite as much, but you can still see the difference. Anyways, I just wanted to add that because I totally forgot about it when I was filming. So all of that to say, the next step that I would suggest is to do your regular printing, but to form the letters more intentionally. So this clip will show that, again, I'm using the same Acroball pen. I've just switched to blue so that it's easier to keep track of where I'm at. And I'm just thinking more about how I want my letters to look. If there's a spot where I would have to go over a line, I'm going to lift my pen up instead to practice. And you'll see some subtle differences. My O is a cursive O basically, same with my R. And I just get to play around with it in that way. It's really important to start getting used to the motions that your hand will make to form the letters, because that will translate across all writing utensils that you'll use. So just a lot of practice with the motions is one of the best suggestions that I can make. Personally, I tend to use monoline hand lettering the most often because I can do it with whatever pen I have on hand. I don't have to switch to a brush pen or anything like that, which for me, the easier, the better, the more consistent I am. So there's also no time I would recommend staying on these stages. I mean, the first one, obviously, you know your own printing, so you can do that one quickly and just remember that you have it for your starting off point. It's always really fun to be inspired by other people's letterings and styles, but there's something really special about looking at it and recognizing that it's yours too. So I hope you can embrace your own handwriting or printing as we go through this. The second stage, where you're just practicing your letters and being intentional with them. I mean, if you only wanted to do monoline lettering, you could stop right there. Just continue practicing, figure out what works best for you, and away you go. Enjoy it. But if you do want to go to brush lettering, the next step I would suggest is to use a Crayola Supertip. So like I said, the bullet tip is going to be instrumental in helping you keep control, because I still find the Tombow dual brush pens harder to control. So the Crayola really gives us a chance to practice. You can see, it's not obviously as fine as this, but you can see where I'm pressing down more and where I'm trying to lighten up. So if you don't have a Crayola brush tip, maybe another bullet tip marker will work. I don't know, these are the only ones that I've tried, but I imagine that it would. So something that gives you a lot of control would be my suggestion for your entry into brush lettering. Again, with every stage, I'm writing the alphabet and the sentence, and it's helpful to see the sentence because it gives me an idea of what it will look like when I'm really using it. Obviously, the alphabet helps me form specific letters in the way that I want, but it's not really a good overview of how it will show, you know, writing that says something. So once you're feeling comfortable with the Crayola Supertip or something similar, and you feel like you understand where to put pressure and how that will make your letters look, then you can move on to brush pens. And there is a huge variation in brush pens, in size, in color, in how wet they are, in control. I would think that starting with a smaller tip would be easier. That said, I started with the Tombow dual brush pens and it's worked out. So again, I would suggest whatever you have on hand. I found it very, very frustrating to start. You'll see, even as I am using my Tombow Fudenosuke hard tip, I have some lines that are shaky, some lines where I haven't pressed hard enough at all, so I have to kind of add the lines, and that's okay. I mean, it is what it is. We're not robots. We're not going to have the perfect amount of pressure every time. And also with brush pens, the tips do change. So I have a Tombow Fudenosuke hard tip and it's not dry or frayed, but it's a lot older than the other one. I think this is the first one I ever used. So this one has a duller tip, and that just means it's juicier and it doesn't give me as much control. Now I'm using the same pen and the same technique and writing in a slightly different style. So here I have more space between the letters and you can see I'm adding kind of that wavy or curvy line to connect them. And I think it's just fun to see how you can use the same pen to create a lot of different effects. I did also film myself writing out the alphabet and the sentence with the Tombow dual brush pen. I think I'll include that clip at the very end of the video, so just make sure to watch to the end if you're interested in seeing that. And that's pretty much it. Nothing groundbreaking here, just the stages that I would recommend going through if you want to learn to improve your hand lettering or start it or just be more consistent. And once you have the basics down, so once you're comfortable with the motions and you're able to adjust to different writing utensils, then you can really begin to play around and incorporate your individual style. Things that you might consider when it comes to individual style is, do you like your brush lettering to be more straight? Or maybe you want it to be more italicized, so it has that lean. You also might consider how you want your letters to connect. So this is a kind of narrower spacing. This is pretty much the spacing I would use if I was printing, but for a different effect, right, you can work on your lines connecting. Farther apart like that. Whether or not you want your letters to be more angular or round. So hello isn't a good word for that. Maybe lettering. So if I wanted it to be rounder, it might look like might look something like that. If I wanted it to be more angular, it might look something like that. So we talked about how your letters connect and also the spacing. You also might want to adjust the heights of your letters. This is something that I always struggle with because I am so used to having consistent writing where it's in a neat line, it's all the same size. That is just what my hand lettering gravitates towards. I have to really think about it if I want my letters to be at different heights. So these are all the same height, but maybe if I wanted to write lettering, I mean, this would be something I would play with, but something like that where it just feels bouncier is fun. And don't forget, all of these translate to, these are all in a handwriting style, but like you can use the same principles, right? For if you want all caps, if you want a lowercase, or a mix. Same principles, thicker on the downstroke and thinner otherwise. And that's not a hard and fast rule. You'll play around, you'll figure out what you like. I still struggle with it with all uppercase letters, like which one do I want to be thickest on the N? Is it this one? Is it the middle one? It changes. But yeah, play around, figure out what you're drawn to, and honestly, it just might always vary. Mine usually do. It just depends on what I'm in the mood for, what I'm using it for, and what I have the tools for. And speaking of tools, this won't be a surprise to you, but my personal favorites are the Tombow Fudenosuke in the hard tip. This is what I use the most often for lettering. For monoline lettering, I usually just use my Acroball or whatever pen I'm planning with. But if it's a more intentional quote or a card or something, I will use a Le Pen technical drawing pen in a 0.1 or up to get a good effect. And when it comes to bigger brush lettering, my favorites are the Sailor Shikiori brush pens. So it's smaller than the Tombow brush tip, and I find it a little bit firmer. Sorry, it's smaller than the Tombow dual brush tip, and obviously much larger still than the Fudenosuke. But I find that it gives me good control. And it's big, but it's not as big as the Tombow, and the color selection is just beautiful. Oh, that's way too close, but that's okay. Yeah, this is how mine usually turns out, a mix of printing and handwriting. So those are just my personal favorites if anyone is interested. And in terms of how I actually apply this, I like to use it in my journaling and my planning to add decor, and also just to emphasize certain things that I'd like to stand out from the page. So I haven't shown this yet, I don't think. It's a newer spread, but I just have my word for the year, and I plan to add any quotes that go along with it. So you can see there's some hand lettering there. We move into April, which is where I started this. I've used some here for my reflections page. And then as we go throughout, you'll just see like little bits of the monoline lettering here when I want to emphasize anything. Lunch and hot cross buns. I use different styles here. The Blue Jays. For my new cover. And for a page like this where I have a full quote, so this is more italicized, I don't do that as often, and I have some different styles here just to highlight certain things that we did that day. This was with the Sailor Shikiori brush pen, and I love that. Lettering is fun, and one of the other suggestions I will make is to try not to compare yourself to others. There's always going to be beautiful handwriting out there, and it doesn't mean that yours isn't. It just means that We have a lot of inspiration and a lot of handwriting candy to look at. There are also a ton of other resources and videos if you want to delve into this further. I don't have any specific recommendations, but they are only a quick Google or YouTube search away. I would also love to hear from you if you have any favorite brush pens or pens for lettering, anything like that. Please let us know. And if you have any tips or tricks you've learned along the way, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.